Hi, I'm Matthew Herzberg, and this is the Myopia Mindset. This is your weekly check-in for everything motivation, education, and inspiration on your path to success with myopia management. And speaking of education, I am super excited about this episode because I have two absolute legends on with me. These two guys have together and separately done so much to shape our industry, their research, their speaking, all of the things that they've written about myopia control, Ortho-K. It is my honor to have Pat, Caroline, and Randy Kojima on the Myopia Mindset. Guys, thank you so much for joining us.
You bet, Matt. Thank you.
Awesome. And this is going to be part of our Road to Vision by Design 2025 series. So we're going to be highlighting a lecture at Vision by Design. You can find out more information about the meeting at aaomc.org. It's taking place in late October. And both of these guys' CVs would take up the entire episode for me to read them. So we're just going to jump right into it. Gentlemen, the lecture is called Assessing the Topographical Myopia Control Signal in Orthokeratology and Understanding Sagittal Depth in Orthokeratology and All Contact Lenses. And when I looked at the description for this lecture, I was blown away by it. Randy spoke briefly about it in my interview with him. So let's start with the lecture itself. Talk about the research, the lecture, and take it from there.
Well, the lecture is really going to be focusing in on how we can modulate the myopia control signal to the child's eye. You know, back in the old days, Matt, it used to be we would do orthokeratology on a child and just that was it, you know, with the myopia control treatment. They either responded well or not. And the results of the studies showed that we could control the child's myopia to a degree of around 50%. And some children would do extremely well with Ortho-K, and then there's this relatively large cohort that would not do well. Now, what we're trying to do is modulate the treatment of Ortho-K. That is very quickly in the Ortho-K treatment, i.e. 1 month, we have to make a decision. Is this child getting the desired myopia control signal we're trying to target? That is, are they responding to Ortho-K? If they're not responding, and I'm talking 50% of the kids may not be responding well, we have to change our course. We have to go to a different optical zone design in the Ortho-K lens, or we have to add additional therapies such as atropine. So that's kind of what our story is. And Randy has developed some new tools that have really shed some great light on how we can identify and modulate this signal.
It's such a wacky thing, isn't it, that we start Ortho-K or soft myopia control lenses, and we have to wait 6 months to figure out, do they actually work? You know, we have to monitor the patient and monitor their axial growth, or hopefully their axial resting. And it would be nice to begin treatment and say, the eye's healthy, we're creating quality vision, but as Pat said, we're creating a quality signal, and we could predict that that would be appropriate for the patient over the long term. But the present way that we all approach myopia control is to start a patient out in something and then monitor. We really don't know if we're creating the appropriate signal right in the beginning before we send them away for 6 months. So this is what it's all about, is making sure, as Pat said, that are we creating the right signal in the beginning?
And go more into the signal if you can. So my understanding is that this is a signal between the brain and the eye based on like the peripheral defocus effect of Ortho-K, for example, and it affects the eye in that capacity. Can you go more into that? Do I have that right? And if so, can you go more
Yeah,
into it?
it's a crazy story, Matt. We're in a very peculiar situation here with our myopia control treatments in the fact that no one on the planet knows how it works. We're dealing in something, we know the results. We know that if we intervene with these dual optics, with atropine and everything, we know that we can control the myopia. But the neurotransmitting chemicals that are being altered in this pathway, we just literally don't know that answer yet. We will know the answer in 5 years. But right now, we just put the patient in a therapy and monitor then how they respond to that therapy. The actual mechanism as to what is happening with the eye and with the brain and everything else is still a surprising mystery to us. And being brought to question right now is this whole peripheral defocus mechanism. And it's pretty clear that this is a foveal-driven phenomenon. This has nothing to do with peripheral defocus. Now, I know that is kind of heresy to say that in a myopia control meeting. But, you see lenses like the Altius lens coming out from J&J. It is a center near multifocal contact lens.
The ability.
Yeah, the ability. Yeah, the Altius. The ability. And so how it can actually work to create peripheral defocus, it's not. And other studies have shown that children who are wearing spectacles that have plus power in the center or have a myopia controlling plus power in the periphery get myopia control. But when they put minus power in the periphery, they still get myopia control, which brings up an important concept, and that is conflicting retinal signals. We're now moving in the direction that the retina can be confused by creating two different images, whether it's plus in the periphery or minus in the periphery. The eye doesn't seem to care. As long as there's this internal conflict of these retinal images taking place, a myopia controlling effect takes place. So you could see here, Matt, we're in a really peculiar place. We don't know what the mechanism for myopia control is. We don't know how the optics actually work. We don't know if we can create this with minus power in the periphery or plus power in the periphery. Both seem to work. So we're at a really exciting time right now. It's a total time of discovery. Right. And that's what makes it so exciting. We as clinicians, we just got to keep an open mind that these researchers are doing their job and trying to find the answers to these questions. But nonetheless, we know that we can now, we can get positive results. So we'll just wait for the science to eventually catch up with us.
Right. So are we saying that orthokeratology as a modality could potentially, influence this effect specifically, right? So is that true? Okay.
Yes, because it appears through Randy's work that as we increase the plus power, the plus signal in the periphery, that we get a better myopia control signal to the eye and less axial eye growth. we've got pretty strong data from our lab here to indicate that that is indeed the case. The stronger we make that signal, the better the myopia control is with orthokeratology.
Great. So then are we looking at a potential future where Ortho-K can be customized to optimize myopia control on a unique design for each individual patient?
Exactly correct. You nailed it, Matt. Could not be said better. I could never say it that good. I'm going to have to listen back to what you said because it was so perfect. It is. It's going to be now, today, we have to customize the treatment for each individual child because each individual child is going to respond very differently. Now, this is nothing new in medicine. Doctors know that certain patients respond to certain medications. We know this is often the case with glaucoma treatments, that certain patients just do not do well on a certain medication and respond very favorably to others. So because we don't understand these pathways of what actually creates the myopia control treatment, we have to keep an incredibly open mind as clinicians. Monitor that child very carefully in that first month or two. See if they're getting, if the myopia is indeed slowing down, and then modulate our treatments. And fortunately today, we've got Ortho-K designs that we can modulate. We've got the introduction of atropine and other therapies. So it's an exciting time.
Just
Go
an
ahead.
example, Matt, in regards to your customization, should a patient with a pupil this big have the same optics as a patient who has a pupil this big or this big? The amount of customization, it's so deep in how we can approach each and every eye. And, that's just talking about pupil size, how the epithelium responds. And if they have astigmatism, how you might alter the effect, not just across the flat, but across the steep. So there's all kinds of ways that we can be appropriately designing the lenses to match each patient's need. And that's not something we've historically done, right? That in past years, we would take the same lens that we would fit on an adult and fit it on a child. We'd fit the same lens that would be fit on one patient with low myopia. We'd fit the same lens on a patient with high myopia. We're not altering the parameters. So we're really moving the needle, I think, as an industry to recognize that there's so many ways we can customize these lenses to create signal specific to each patient, each eye.
Yeah, and that kind of leads into a question I was going to ask you guys, because one of the questions I had thought of was, do we always need a small treatment zone? Like, what do we do about like a patient with a larger pupil size? Can you speak more to that, since you mentioned pupil size?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of things you could do. You could treat the child with a larger optical zone, let's say a 6mm or traditional optical zone, but then you can add low-dose atropine to their therapy. The bigger the pupil, the better the myopia control signal. We create greater amounts of spherical aberration. So yeah, the big pupil is an issue with orthokeratology, but here we're just a simple addition of low-dose atropine really can be advantageous to the child. So yeah, and that child, you may need to use a dual treatment. So it's just such a, we got tools.
Right.
And we have to use every tool in the toolbox. But as you can imagine, Matt, it's all centered around axial length measurements. And axial length measurements have been a critical tool in understanding these early adaptations to myopia control. Are we getting the appropriate signal for that individual child? And that we have to pick up with very conscientious, very deliberate axial length measurements. And that is why when we're doing our axial length measurements here at Pacific, we like to do 20 measurements. Got to remember, we're trying to get measurements on a very young child. That child is just naturally going to be moving fixation a little bit. I know some of our kids are phenomenal, but some of them aren't so good. They get distracted early. And so we really like to do 20 measurements. They go very quick. You know, you could do 20 measurements in 30 seconds. And so we're not talking about a long, drawn-out procedure, but taking the average now of those 20 measurements and throwing out the measurements where the signal-to-noise ratio isn't appropriate, man, you can really get some powerful data in a very short window of time. It's so funny, Matt, when we're doing our choroidal thickness measurements to see, is a child's choroid getting thicker with treatment? You only need the lenses on the eyes for 30 minutes. In 30 minutes, we can tell pretty definitively whether a child is getting a myopia control signal or not. So that is some exciting information. We can put on a studied lens here at the university. We can do those choroidal thickness measurements. And instead of the child wearing the lens for a year, we know in 30 minutes how the retina is responding to that therapy. So I got to tell you, buddy, we are in for some exciting times up ahead, research-wise, clinical-wise. And I think the wonderful thing here is perhaps our ability to join the clinic together with the research and be able to combine those two to really give the child the best treatment we possibly can.
Isn't it amazing that 10 years ago, nobody was using axial length? Only research sites had axial length devices, biometers. And now we're looking at choroid, where we never looked at that historically. And we have these two measurements that have really changed how we approach industry. And I mean, we're hearing from the podium more often, standard of care is a biometer, right? That where 10 years ago, nobody had one, right? Clinicians didn't have them. And so it's really, as you said, it's moving so quick and we're learning so much so fast.
And that's a perfect lead into my next question, because, you know, you mentioned research and all the cool things you were doing. And, you know, I think of the two of you like two kids in a candy store when it comes to this kind of stuff, but it makes me think about like the more practical application, because, you know, orthokeratology, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a 50% myopia control, generically speaking. And you know, I imagine the average ECP thinks to themselves, okay, 50% myopia control, that's good enough for me. You know, so I'm wondering what the practical applications of this are in the future. You know, where does this fit in that regard?
Well, the future looks absolutely awesome, because I know that too many bright minds are working on this right now to figure out what is the mechanism for myopia control. You see, in the world of medicine, we can treat a lot of different things, But we can do that because we know the mechanism as to how it works. Diabetes, high blood pressure, glucose. We all know the mechanisms for these conditions, and therefore we can target our therapies. Right now, we don't know the mechanism as to how myopia control works, and it's pretty clear it's multifactorial. It's not just one mechanism. The optical mechanisms of orthokeratology and multifocal soft lenses work on probably a very different principle than does atropine or pharmacologic interventions. So once we get that story figured out and we know how it works, we're going to even be able to better target our treatments for these kids. But Randy brought up such a good point. 10 years ago, axial length measurements were just not even part of a normal practice. Today it is. Today, choroidal thickness measurements at 30 minutes is not part of the routine treatment. However, a new instrument was just introduced in China that does automatic choroidal thickness measurements. We've worked with it. It is unbelievably awesome. It does all of the measurements, automatically. Right now, when we do choroidal thickness measurements, we have to actually take the image and we have to digitize it and do these measurements kind of by hand. So it takes very, very time consuming.
And impractical, right?
And impractical
at this present time.
It really is. And but that's research. Then the bioengineers take over and they go, oh my gosh, you guys, we can do this in seconds. I remember the day, Matt, when we were doing a photokeratoscopy before video keratoscopy, before the color-coded maps. And we would take the rings and we would hand measure the distance between the rings. We would divide by 4.97. When that measurement sticks in my head, this was 40, 50 years ago that we did this, but we would have to do that, and then we could map out the surface of the eye. It took 45 minutes to map out by hand the curvatures of these eyes. Today, it takes less than a second. So it just, man, I'll tell you, getting old that's the only advantage. You really appreciate what the bioengineers can do. So don't ever say, well, it's too time consuming. Yes, it is right now. But just give those bioengineers a few years and they do some incredible work.
Yeah, definitely. We'll end on this question because, I've been attending your guys' lectures for as long as you've been doing them, in my opinion, like as long as I've been in this industry. And it seems like this particular lecture represents like an evolution and how we think of all of these aspects, right? And I want to talk about how things have changed for you guys over time. You were talking about the perspective of age specifically. And, I'm reminded of that retrospective 5-year study by Eddie Chow that showed that, by utilizing multi-curve lenses and steeper reverse curves and aspheric optic zones and Jessen factor, et cetera, he improved results over a standard 4 or 5 curve design. So speak about how things have changed for you guys, and how was Dr. Chow's work an influence on you guys, and to walk us through how things have evolved over this long period of time to where we are now.
Yeah, I would maybe step in and say Pat was one of the first to suggest that we should first look at the type of topographical response that we have and how a -3 effect could be different for one patient versus another patient, and how's that possible when you're putting the same lens on both these -3 eyes and you get two very different topographies? And so Pat suggested that, hey, maybe we could influence the shape that comes out by manipulating the optic zone sizes. So he was really the first to say, hey, let's not accept that we should always fit a 6 mm optic zone or 6.2 or 5.8. We should maybe try to alter that shape much more. And so that led to a construction that was exploring using the smaller optic zone. And then Pat and Eddie actually worked quite close together in those early years. And then Eddie took that on in his study with great enthusiasm and produced this incredible study with, such a large cohort of the small optic zone and the large optic zone. So I think Eddie's influence was incredibly powerful in that he provided the clinical outcomes that we understood that in long term, these smaller optic zones were producing better outcomes.
And then tell them about the Hong Kong Polytechnic study.
Yeah, the VOLT study is one that really has moved the needle as well. We had Eddie's study, we have Jaume Pani's study from Spain, and now the VOLT study that suggests that when you use the smaller optic zone, you can up that signal to have more than 50% less eye growth. So yeah, it's a pretty exciting time that we're seeing that these specific modifications to the parameters are producing better myopia control in Ortho-K. But one of the things you said, Matt, that I think was really important too, is that when we use smaller optic zones, it does produce more topographical signal to send to the back of the eye and slow down eye growth. But we also have to be sensitive, and you mentioned it, for somebody with a large pupil, they might be more sensitive than others to having those aberrations. And we found in the VOLT study that there was a number of patients, it was small, I think it was 2 patients that just couldn't handle having that small optic zone. They had too much aberration. So we took them out of the small optic zone and put them in the larger optic zone, and they did just fine. So it's not always going to be, one method for every patient. We're going to have to customize for each patient.
Right. Yeah.
And then, like you said, Matt, with regards to this lecture that's coming up, what is it going to entail? And I think you're right. It's the sum total of the knowledge that we have learned about orthokeratology and myopia control over the past 20 years. We're not going to do a historical perspective, but the end result is we are in an incredible place right now. We're right where we should be as an industry. We're going to just continue to keep moving the needle here as much as we can until we flatline the myopia control. You see these myopia control, charts that show increasing myopia with time and so on. We're not going to stop until we put a child in Ortho-K and completely, to the best of our ability, limit their eye growth. Got to remember, kind of an important fact for the folks that are listening, the eye reaches its adult axial length at about age 5, 23.5 millimeters. I'm talking age 5. The eye stops growing, unless there are some outside influences. So eyes reach adult size very, very quickly in our evolution as a human. So we're going to try to hold that 23.5 axial length as best we can throughout the child's life.
And also using or having an understanding of soft multifocal lenses will also be a big component of the talk. So it won't all be signal in orthokeratology. We're also going to talk about how we look at the signal in soft multifocal lenses. So we're super excited to share these findings. So
wow, yeah. Yeah, I can't wait to attend the lecture for sure. It's going to be fantastic. You know, whenever you guys speak, you can it's almost like you can hear the noise of people's brains exploding when you guys talk. You just hear it, like people are like, wow, wow, wow. You can hear it throughout the audience, and it's just it's amazing. I want to thank you, both of you, so much for coming on, and thank you for the role that you've played, you know, in our industry, all of the important work that the two of you have done. I mean, you've shaped how we think about all of these things, and you're constantly challenging us and reinventing how we think about all of these concepts. So thank you so much for your contribution, and I can't wait to attend the lecture for sure.
Well, we geek out a lot over here, don't we?
We geek out a lot. So thank you, Matt, for inviting us to be a part of this story. The work you're doing in promoting myopia control is absolutely phenomenal. We're so happy and for you, and we thank you so much.
Awesome. Awesome. All right. Well, for everybody else, we'll see you at the next one.